Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has wrapped up his whirlwind visit to China. China and the U.S. have agreed to move ahead with a new UN resolution on the DPRK for its latest nuclear test, but remain far apart on how hard to push Pyongyang. The South China Sea issue also weighed heavily in talks between Kerry and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Before stopping in China, Kerry also visited Laos and Cambodia. What was the purpose of those trips, and what have we learned about Washington's policies towards China in the past few days? To discuss these issues, I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Yang Xiyu and Mr. Ren Zongze from the China Institute of International Studies. But before we get started, let's look at this background report.
Representing two great powers. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry at the Great Hall of the People. Xi spoke in glowing terms about China-U.S. cooperation, while Kerry praised China's role in countering extremism, managing climate change, and restraining Iran's nuclear program.
China
and the U.S. have very good and timely exchanges on key international issues of Iran, North Korea, and Afghanistan. In general, I'm satisfied with the overall development of China-U.S. relations.
Kerry also met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, with the DPRK nuclear issue as a key concern. Pyongyang's most recent nuclear test has sparked tension across the region. Both agreed the UN Security Council needs to take further action and pass a new resolution.
To achieve denuclearization, we have to take the path of negotiation and consultation. Sanctions are not an end in themselves. The key is to really resolve the issue.
The South China Sea disputes were also on the agenda. During Kerry's trip to Laos and Cambodia, he had called on the two ASEAN members to present a united front over China's activities in the region. But Cambodia proved reluctant to get involved. Wang urged the United States to play a constructive role in dealing with what he called sensitive issues.
China is firmly committed to maintaining peace in the South China Sea, easing differences through dialogues and settling disputes through negotiations and consultations. China and the United States should deal with the sensitive issues in a constructive way to ensure a good prospect for Sino-U.S. cooperation.
The Asia-Pacific remains a region of myriad security challenges. But while the U.S. and China have their own national interests, Kerry's visit may be a sign that both sides believe cooperation may be the only way forward.
Gentlemen, what do you think of the outcome, if any, coming out of this visit by John Kerry, Secretary of State from the United States? Was it only about the DPRK nuclear testing, or is a package of issues that both sides are so concerned with? Mr. Ren.
Well, absolutely. In my point of view, it was a very good visit. It was a very good talk. And John Kerry met with his counterpart Wang Yi and also Xi Jinping, Chinese president. And one of the details emerged from their talk. Actually, the press briefings has been delayed for almost 3 hours. That means that they have a very in-depth and constructive talk on a variety of issues. So with regard to the context of the talk, I think it's much more than the three stories highlighted by, just now you mentioned about South China Sea, Korea Peninsula, and also the other issues. And also this is a very important visit. Before this year, we anticipate there's a number of presidential exchange with each other. For example, Xi may pay a visit or will travel to Washington early this spring, and Obama will come to China in September for the G20 summit. So I think this was a kind of also preparation talk.
What do you think of the outcome, Mr. Yang?
In general, the outcomes as general expectations say the visit contribute further to the stable bilateral relations between China and the United States. But on the individual issues, mainly North Korean issue, North Korean nuclear issue, and the South China Sea issue, different results. Compared with the South China Sea issue, on the nuclear issue, China and the U.S. achieved a further consensus on the unified position against the nuclearization made by the North Korea. And meanwhile, the two countries agreed to forge a strong, responsive resolution by UNSC to the fourth nuclear test conducted by the North Korea. Although the two countries remain in differences in technical issues regarding to the sanction measures. But on South China Sea issue, I think it's at least it's a good chance for the two countries to exchange further, to understand each other further, and that will be helpful to manage and control the difference if we cannot solve this difference in short term.
China seeks to have a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula, and it's not the first time for China to try to present the united front against the nuclearization in the Korean Peninsula. But it is rather an issue of how hard both sides would push the DPRK, which says this WMD would be used to defend its own sovereignty, because no players would seriously provide the DPRK with security assurance. In that case, are there any serious disputes between Washington and Beijing about the alleged or proposed accelerated effort to push the DPRK after the nuclear test?
Well, I think the narrative has been quite clear that China opposed strongly the North Korea's nuclear test explosion whatsoever, as always. And in the same time, China insisted that the international NPT, non-proliferation regime must be upheld. And we share lots of interest with other stakeholders on the Korean Peninsula. But there is also a nuanced differences. We also have to take care of that. As you may mention about to what extent the punishment or sort of a sanction should be posed. I think this is a very important question, but in order to address the nuclear issues on the Korean Peninsula, we need to go to the root cause of this. So sanction is one of the way, maybe hopefully it can bring back the negotiation and the talk. Certainly it's not the aim itself. Let me give you one example. The United States has imposed sanctions to Cuba for 50 years. It turns out the only negotiation and talk bring back Cuba and United States to talk, and that was the key to open the door for normalization of the two countries. So I think the same principle can also apply to Korean nuclear issues. That's the position China has been insistent on and on, that only negotiation and talk will be the key.
Regarding the issue of economic sanctions, we have two entirely different, not exactly entirely different case studies, but one is Cuba, the other Iran. Mm-hmm. China joined the other five parties in negotiating a diplomatic solution to the nuclear ambition of this Persian state, Iran. There is a different voice which says, in the case of Iran, it is exactly the severity of the economic sanctions that was imposed ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution that has paid off. Therefore, Tehran has yielded to the mounting pressure from the West, the United Front in the West, about limiting its nuclear ambition. In the case of DPRK, we see no signs of no slightest signs of any concession. Therefore, many argue that the six-party talks, the process of denuclearization, has come to the dead end. It's a moribund process. It no longer works. Are you this pessimistic?
No, I feel very differently. Of course, there are the six-party talk might not be the perfect example, or may not be the perfect instrument to start the negotiation. However, the key ingredients of this mechanism is negotiation, not the sanctions. You are absolutely right. Maybe the sanctions on Iran really biting and really get the Iran feel the pressure and isolated. But that we have not forgot that the Euro 3, I mean the Europeans, Germany, France, and Britain, Euro 3, and kicked off this kind of talk with each other, and then China, US, Russia joining in. So there is, at the end of the day, it works out a mechanism to address these issues in a comprehensive way. So the Korea issue, however, here is that trust between United States and Pyongyang has been so almost zero. So this kind of sanctions, we have seen the sanction before. This is the fourth time for Pyongyang to test the nuclear arsenal, and previous three times there have been sanctions, the United Nations sanction out there. So it didn't make any significant pressure to stop that sort of nuclear adventure from Pyongyang. So we should think of that.
And I'm afraid the United States and China are seriously locked in growing mistrust, if not animosity, over the issue of the DPRK. Look, the United States pointed out China, and admittedly, China has played a proactive role in bringing all parties together on the issue of Iranian nuclear ambition. But in the case of the DPRK, they said China provides the DPRK with a lifeline supplier, such as food and oil each year, keeping this, what they call evil state or rogue state, alive for so many years. Whilst the DPRK allegedly used the PRC as a... No, the DPRK says, according to Western media reports, they are the outpost against American tyranny, American imperialism. So you got to provide me with what I demand. That's their argument. Mr. Yang, what do you make of the complexity concerning the DPRK scenario?
Well, first, what you said is a really complex question involving both U.S.-China mutual distrust and complicated economic relation between China and North Korea. In terms of economic relation between China and North Korea, I would say by this way, the relationship on economics between the two countries were based in the Cold War era and the planning regime, but now is in transition, and more part of the economic relation between the two countries turn to market-based. So U.S. has exaggerated or over-assessed the significance or importance or whatever about China's economic, the so-called leverage on North Korea. And also, I think the difference between China and the U.S. on the sanction lies in the different way of thinking rather than the different purposes. I think a different way of thinking is China does not oppose sanctions on North Korea after the nuclear test. However, China's way of thinking is that the sanctions should be the targeting rather than the overall. But the U.S. make the sanction as an end, not a means. Just as Dr. Ruan mentioned earlier, sanction is just one of the ways in the peaceful for the peaceful solution rather than the all. But now U.S. put sanction measures all as the solution to the nuclear issue, and also all responsibility on China, because in the situation, all economic sanction measures have been run out by the United States, Japan, South Korea. So that's your turn, Chinese. So I think that's not helpful for the peaceful solution to the nuclear issue.
Thank you very much. You're watching Dialogue with Mr. Ran Zongzi and Mr. Yang Xu. They are both from the Research Institute of International Studies. We are talking about the issues on the agenda between Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his American counterpart about the DPRK nuclear ambition, as well as other issues concerning this most important bilateral relationship in the 21st century between Washington and China. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us. Welcome back. Look, here is a calculation. An alleged calculation by the DPRK, given its track record of 4 nuclear testing, and none of them was seriously punished. Therefore, it could sit back complacently saying, hey, whatever I do, I will not be punished. I won't face any lethal punishment from either my neighboring country of the PRC or from the superpower of the United States. And therefore, despite all the protests or UN resolutions against me, I don't give a damn about it. I just go ahead, and that's an issue of my survival. It's about nuclear deterrence. Whatever you do, I'll just go ahead. I will become, by the end of the day, they declare proudly that they have become a nuclear-armed country. They should be accepted Whatever your attitude, they should be accepted as a member of the nuclear club. What do you think of this alleged calculation by Pyongyang?
Well, actually, you're suggesting that Pyongyang has been working very hard to force its way into the nuclear power club. I don't think it will deliver. I don't think it will work, actually. First of all,
Perhaps it's a matter of time.
well, first of all, let me put it this way. You are absolutely right. This is the first time that conducted nuclear test explosion. And however, that already suffered a great deal. Look at Pyongyang's diplomatically, it's very isolated, and its economy is not in good shape. And also, I think it also triggered the Americans' military deployment in Northeast Asia, particularly on the Korean Peninsula. This is something really biting and also...
Excuse me, but the United States points its finger to the PRC, saying if you were to cut off all your economic supplies, including humanitarian assistance to the DPRK, then perhaps out of desperation they would be brought to their knees.
No, this is not true. Actually, I think this is Americans' way to sort of outsource its responsibility. Actually, every time when Pyongyang conducted nuclear tests, they point finger to Washington. This is one of the ways to force Washington to sit down the table to talk. And what we need to understand what really the Pyongyang really wants. They want one thing. The one thing is to ultimately they have a chance to talk with Washington to hopefully normalize relationship. This is also part of the six-party talk deal. Don't forget, in 2005, we reached a very important agreement. This peace regime or peace negotiation is one of the fundamental.
And Mr. Yang, since 9/11, the DPRK may have demanded a security assurance. For example, Bush the Jr. said they want to seek a regime change through preemptive strikes, and Pyongyang has been described as a part of the axis of evil. And therefore, taking Libya as an example, after removal of their chemical weapons and the weapons of mass destruction, invasion occurred very quickly. To behead, a decapitation campaign occurred pretty soon with the intervention from European powers. So therefore, they say, no, we should not follow suit. We must have our own means of deterrence. We must have our own nuclear deterrence. Therefore, is it possible for Washington to give DPRK a security assurance, meaning they will not seek regime change? After all, that government in Pyongyang wants to survive.
Yep. Well, it's a very good question. Actually, you're touching on a widespread misunderstanding among the public, both in China and abroad. Regarding to the security guarantee, yes, during the earlier stage of junior Bush administration, North Korea repeatedly said security guarantee by the United States, then I can give up the nuclear weapon. And the U.S. rejected bluntly. And China made a lot of efforts to persuade the United States. And finally, U.S. said, yes, I can provide a security guarantee, even written. And North Korea changed their mind. They said, our national security can only guaranteed by ourselves. So meaningless by any other countries, including the United States. Meaningless. I can only guarantee my security by nuclear deterrence. So failed. And then, ironically, U.S. introduced the Gaddafi case. Say, let's try Libya model. At that time, it was a relatively good relation between Libya and the U.S. When they lifted sanctions, Gaddafi submitted all nuclear items. And they said, try Libya model, North Korea. And North Korea said, no, we are not Libya. Actually, it was right. North Korea is not Libya. And then what happened, everyone knows. And North Korea said, thanks to not accepting the so-called Libya model. And they got a conclusion, say, why Gaddafi was killed? Simply because he didn't command the nuclear weapon. So Libya case, really including Iraq case, really strengthened further North Korea's determination to the nuclearization. So by this background, the 9/19 Johnson Statement clearly list, say, U.S. commit not to attack North Korea both by nuclear weapon and conventional means. So if all parties sincerely commit to all commitments within the 919 Johnson Amendment, I think it won't be so difficult to solve this complicated nuclear issue.
Okay, so much for our discussion about the DPRK nuclear testing. What about Mr. Ma Ying-jeou's current visit to Taiping Island, a territory that Taiwan claims after losing this local election to the DPP, the pro-secession political force in the island? Despite the strong advice from Washington to prevent him in vain from making this landmark visit to Taiping Island, he went there.
Yep.
And he insisted that any disputes, maritime disputes in the South China Sea be solved in a peaceful way. What do you think of the ramifications of his visit to Taiping Island, and what do you think of the response from the Chinese government, the mainland government?
Well, I think Ma Ying-jeou did the right thing.
The right thing.
Right.
Yeah,
thing.
it's a good try. He used to want to go actually last December, but because of the Americans, to borrow yours narratives, strongly advised, he back off. Now, after the so-called election, he has nothing to lose anymore. So surely that will be one of the legacy he will create during his tenure as the leadership of Taiwan. And after all, and the former so-called president or leadership of Taiwan has been visited the Taiping Island. So he should not be absent, I think, the one thing. Secondly, I think he also make some, a kind of a suggestion or a kind of achievement which will make the future or upcoming leadership of Taiwan to follow the suit. But to what extent the future leadership will do it remains uncertain. However, I think one of the legacy is that here is the territory of China, so I need to go there and to visit there despite of the strong disappointment or unhappiness from the other countries. I don't think it's right or for other countries to just want to stop him doing that. I think he did a right thing.
Not only did Tsai Ing-wen, leader of the DPP and leader-elect through the campaign, make a cultural trip to Washington before kicking off the election, but the representative of DPP refused to join this trip by Ma Ying-jeou to visit Taiping Island. What message did the DPP deliver to the United States and the mainland?
Well, I think DPP's that rejection reflects DPP's quite ambiguous position on the very serious sovereignty issue on South China Sea, especially on Nansha Islands. Everyone knows among DPP followers, some of them really want to give up Chinese sovereignty on that area, simply because they don't believe they are Chinese. They don't care about that. However, as a leader of DPP, Tsai Ing-wen has to be careful. So the rejection does not mean the rejection of China's sovereignty on South China Sea, but reject Kuomintang's initiative. So I think hopefully the following administration on Taiwan will not break the existing policy and the position on the sovereignty issue on South China Sea.
Why do you think Mr. Ma Ying-jeou has allegedly brushed aside the American advice not to go there? Instead, the KMT representative or spokesperson said they have actually consulted Washington. They have done something to let Washington know the upcoming visit by Ma Ying-jeou to Taiping Island. Do you think there's this kind of diplomatic or whatever you call it, consultation between Taipei and Washington on this trip?
I guess in whatever situation, in such a current circumstances, no matter you tell Washington before or after, Washington will be very much disappointed. As a matter of fact, as far as I understand or as I know, Ma Ying-jeou had passed the message to Washington before his visit to let Washington know and what he was going to do. However, I don't think Washington's will just say, okay, you may go there, because the larger picture of this, America is getting itself more and more increasingly involved in South China Sea. That was, a kind of a dangerous game Washington is playing.
Before John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, came to Beijing, he visited Laos and Cambodia, urging unity in presenting a united front over the issue in South China Sea. Of course, Cambodia showed a strong reluctance. What do you think of the message, if any, that John Kerry delivered before he came to Beijing?
Well, I think John Kerry's visit in Southeast Asia, say Laos and Cambodia, was designed to prepare for the upcoming summit between U.S. and the ASEAN countries. And the concrete purpose, one of the concrete purposes for his visit is to forge you mentioned, the united front against China. United front, they say, united front on South China Sea. Actually, united front against China on South China Sea disputes. So both Kerry's visit in Laos and Cambodia and visit Beijing reflect the same intention of the United States, say, make a united front as a pressure tool on China. So before he came to Beijing, he has prepared the pressure tool.
He built the prelude to the message that he wanted to deliver Beijing of the same nature.
Oh, yeah,
Look,
yeah.
This is the pressure against China.
I don't think it will work.
It won't work.
It will be going to be never
Counterproductive.
Never going to be work. Of course, he picked now is on purpose because now is currently serving as a rotating presidency or the president, the chairman of ASEAN. So that will play a very significant part in agenda setting and in the next summit and also in the period of time to come.
And do you think South China Sea will become the embarrassing part of Obama's legacy after he leaves the White House for Republicans?
I think this issue, I'd rather to use the other word, say trouble. South China Sea,
Particularly for Donald Trump.
Oh yes, I think anyway. I think South China Sea will be the trouble issue left by Obama for the next administration, next president. No matter it's come from the Democrats or Republican.
You know, I'm ready to moderate or host a debate with Donald Trump. He turned down a similar debate with Fox. Okay, but I'm not a woman. He will possibly humiliate a male moderator. Well, that's our wishful thinking, perhaps, for the speak mouth of the Republicans. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.